first chapter is all about that phone call from Dad and what happened after that, which basically meant I was in the middle of a show that this guy over here was directing, that he had kind of talked me into, and it's called Greensboro, and I called him from from home in Chicago. I said, John, I'm not going to make the show tomorrow night. And he moved heaven and earth, and the cast did, to replace me for a night. So I got there, and I'm going to start with what happened when I walked into the hospital room where Mom was. Each room in the surgical ICU had an internal wall of solid glass so you could get a quick glance of your patient's status from afar. The floor was quiet except for the hum of equipment and the syncopated beeping of apparatuses that calibrated a patient's rate of recovery or decline. Moving, colored graphs with flashing numbers spoke for bedridden bodies. The angle and pace of a line, the rising and lowering of numeric values signaled when a family member could breathe or panic. It was both a maddening and comforting permission to be in the company of these life-measuring machines. Suddenly, I heard a patient erupt, "Get the fuck away from me!" I froze. I thought the patients were too drugged up for such outbursts, and I wondered who was so out of control, unwilling to admit that the voice, if not the words, sounded an awful lot like my mother. And so it was.
Wow.
Or at least someone they said was my mother. She in no way resembled the woman I'd grown up with. Bandages strained to contain her head, which was the size of a cassava melon. The swelling spread her features out in ways that made her look like a fleshy Botero rendering of herself. Sea green IV tubing curled out of her like the tentacles of a mythic monster. She was tied down and struggling like a demon, yelling for someone to get me the hell out of here. I had never before heard my mother utter anything stronger than, "Oh, for John's sake." An epithet I never understood, yet I knew conveyed irritation. She had a wrestling hold on the hand of the nurse who was trying to calm her down. "She's awfully strong with that left hand," the nurse smiled through a wince. Dad stood to her right, scruffy as always, in stained slacks and his favorite overworn sweater of muted red and blue plaid. He was silent, not attempting to run the show, not asking excruciatingly detailed questions or making demands. I stared at his sweater for a long moment to avoid being pulled into the helplessness of his face, something I hadn't seen since I had tried to comfort him many years ago when my folks separated. Like then, there was not a glimmer of normality in our family scene. The only way to soothe the terror that rose in my throat was to focus intensely on one point: Mom. "Your mother had a hemorrhagic stroke," the nurse said, still trying to wrest herself from Mom's grip. A frenzied feral bleed had drowned a vast collection of Mom's front temporal brain cells, the ones responsible for organizing sensory input and regulating emotional response. How long would its effects last? Could she survive it? Every outburst led to a spike in her blood pressure that alarmed the nurse and therefore alarmed me. Then, I really took in my father. He stood to Mom's left near the head of the bed. He was not close enough to touch her easily, just close enough to be someone who mattered, who should be there. He was stone silent, his face fallen in fatigue. The usual flash of his brown eyes was dulled to a matte finish, yet he held Mom dutifully in his sights. Or perhaps he did not know where else to look. His posture, which had curved with age, held all the emotion of the past 24 hours in a weighted sag. He was in a situation so completely outside his skill set, and he had no clue how to communicate with this new wife he saw before him. In that moment, I knew my role. I was to collude with a medical system that was counter to every belief my mother held and that I trusted blindly because I didn't know where else to turn in the face of such catastrophic illness. Communicating with Mom on her spiritual terms lay far beyond any rudimentary knowledge I retained from Sunday school. I watched her nurse study the monitor while remaining in Mom's grip. She turned to look at Dad and me and said matter-of-factly, if not calmly, "If her numbers go over 185, she's getting into a danger zone that could cause another stroke." At that moment, I silently addressed the demon that had Mom in its clutches and ordered it aside so I could talk to the woman I had known as my mother for nearly 50 years. I pried her defiant fingers loose from the nurse's compassionate hand and took them into my own. "Hi, Mom, it's me. I know this is completely unfamiliar and really scary, and I also know you're going to be all right." She looked at me like I was speaking in tongues. "I want to get out of here," she screamed, squeezing my hand hard on the word out for emphasis. I didn't let go. "I know you want to get out of here. Dad and I want you to get out of here. Probably this whole floor wants you to get out of here. But for that to happen, you have got to calm down. You have always told me my entire life that all will be well. You ended every letter, every phone call with those words. Even when I didn't believe they were true, I couldn't ignore them. Then I realized that somewhere I did believe they were true." Her hand loosened ever so slightly, but her eyes never left my face, my lips. "You've got to believe they're true now, even if it doesn't feel like it ever will be." Her breath started to slow. She relaxed back onto the bed, still holding on. "Dad and I are both here. We're not going to let you go. Let yourself rest." The nurse went to the other side of the bed and injected something into Mom's IV. "Since she's calmed down some, this should help her sleep," she said. And then she left us alone. I kept talking and holding on to Mom's hand. She listened. Somehow she reached for her lifelong relationship with me. We held on to one another for dear life. I couldn't afford to break down, and she couldn't afford to heat up. After a while, the multi-purpose medical cocktail knocked her out. Dad needed to go home, and so did I.